Welcome guys, in this video we'll be working with the Passport.js library which is used to authenticate the users. So to implement authentication process using the Passport library, there are 6 main steps. So the first thing is that we need to initialize the Passport middleware which gives access to the request and response object. The second one is we need to give access to the session store. We do this by dot session method. The third one is dot use. Now what this dot use does is that we need to implement or give a pre-built strategy, like we can give it a GitHub strategy so users can authenticate using their GitHub account. But in this video we'll be working with the local strategy, so we'll be building our own logic. So the next step is passport.serialize. What this does is that after the user has been authenticated, we can store its like username or something else in our session store, so that whenever it makes a request, we can retrieve that data and verify that the user is authenticated or not. And that process is known as deserialization. That is retrieving the data from the session store. Inserting the data is serialization, and retrieving it from the session store is deserialization. At the end, we have the passport.authenticate method. Here we'll be inserting our strategy name, that is local strategy. And we can check whether the user is authenticated or not using the request.user method. If the user is authenticated, then we will get the data from the session store that we have stored using the .serialize method. Otherwise, it will be undefined if the user has not been authenticated. So let's say this in real life. Here I have a endpoint which starts with dot card. Now what I want is that only the authenticated user should be able to access it. So authenticated users can make a get request where they will get the uh, fish that are in their cart. So I have used request.user, and if this is true, that is there is some value, then only we will run this query. Otherwise we'll send a JSON object which states that the user is not authenticated. So you can download the passport library using the command npm install passport. I have already done that. Let's implement let's implement this in real life. So the first thing we need to do is app.use passport.initialize. After that, we need to use the session store. So I have already created a MySQL session store, and after this we need to now we will be implementing our own local strategy in passport.js. So the way we do this is by passport.use, and then uh, we make a instance of our local strategy class. New local strategy. So the arguments that it takes is a object, which is an optional argument. I'll explain you about this one. And the second argument it takes is a function. So function, and I'll explain you the structure of the function. So the first thing that will be passing is username. The second will be password, uh, word, and the third thing will be a done function. So now this empty object, it's a optional argument, but if let's say in the front end you are passing the data to the back end, and in front end the username is like something user details, so the passport will own by default the passport only recognize the username field and the password field. If you want to create your custom fields, then we can use this object. So we can do this by using a username field property for the username and password field property for the password. But this is completely optional. If your code isn't working, this might be the reason. So now we are in the callback function that we have given to our local strategy. Now in this, we'll run a query against our database. It will be whatever. If you are using MongoDB, then you can implement your own logic from there. I'm using SQL, so you can understand. Yeah, now if there is some error while fetching the data, then we can call this done function with the error object. Or if we are not able to find the user, like if the data returned, the data is returned in the form of array in MySQL2 package. So if there is no user found, then we can always call done with a null and a false value. But if we do manage to find the user and the password is also correct, then we can call done null with a true value. No, with a data value. That is the data that we found. You can see here I have implemented a local strategy where I have used username with the N capital, so I need to pass in this object as a schema for my function where it will identify the username. The password is the same as the front end and the back end one, so there is no use for this one. Now after running this query, I am comparing the passwords, and once everything is correct, I'm calling the done function with the null and the data parameter. If we have a error, then we call done with error, and if the user is not found or the password is incorrect, then we simply call done with null and a false value. Now where do this data go? Well, this data basically goes to the serialize function. So passport dot serialize. I'm not very good with the spelling, so let me just copy paste it. Passport dot serialize. Now it takes a callback function with two arguments, that is data and the done function. Now this data is the data that we received from running our SQL query on the database. So we can call the done function with either the data, or we can only store some part of it, like only the username of the data. We don't want to store the password or anything else in our session store, so we can call this thing. Yeah, one more thing, and while calling this we need to pass in null for indicating that there is no error. If there is some error, then we can always call done with the error. Now, once our data has been serialized, we also want to deserialize the user, that is, retrieve the information from the session store. So, to do this, we have passport dot deserialize user function, which is similar to the serialize. The only difference is serialize is used to insert the data into the session store, whereas deserialize is used to retrieve the data. So the value of the data here will be the thing that we store in our serialized user, that is the username. If we store the password, then the value of data will be password. So we can call this by done, and then the first argument will be null if there is no error, and the second one will be data. Now the value of this then goes to and modifies the request object, and we can retrieve it by request.user. So in our cart endpoint, what I wanted is that only the authenticated user should be able to use it. So what I did is that I used request.user property. If the value is null, then the query will not be run against my database, and it will show a message to the client that the user is not authenticated. So let's see a live example of this. Currently my database have one user in it. Let me delete it. After this we'll be heading to our website. So let's take an example. So this is my website where user can buy fish, and only the authenticated users should be able to access the cart data. Now whenever I click on any of the fish here, it will show its detail and a option to add to cart. Now I'm not currently logged in, so I should not be able to get the data. As you can see, it gives me a prompt login to add items to your cart. So let's just log in, and I also don't have account, so let me just sign up. Mm, So whenever we sign up, we get a email on so that our website doesn't get bombarded with the fake emails, and only the verified emails are there. So here is our URL. If I click on this, then as you can see in the URL, we have a token field. Now, what logic I have implemented in the backend is that whenever a user register, a token is created, and then that token is emailed to the client, and whenever the client clicks on the URL, the token is sent back to the server, and the data is retrieved from that token and then stored in the database. So when I click here, you can see my email is now verified and I can continue the shopping. So now let's first add it, and then now we can log in into our account. Home. Now it's time to enter the password. It was, and the credentials were true, and now we can add as many fish as we want to our cart, and the data will be stored.